Welcome, colleagues, friends, family. Welcome to the third forum of our Black History Month. This is the third forum. Our first forum was around self-care. Our second forum was around holistic care. And tonight we're going to have a special forum around repair. Our theme has been from resiliency to recovery. And as I said, tonight we will be talking about reparations. We have some dynamic guests with us, presenters. A few housekeeping notes we wanted just to let you know of about as you listen and think and contemplate these vital issues around reparations, that there are folks in the background to receive your questions and comments. If you would be so kind to put your comments or questions, we hope to have at least a half hour after the presentations to entertain those questions. So with no further ado, we want to let you know tonight we will be talking about the historical, the theological, and the policy making and activism around reparations. It's going to be a great presentation, and we just ask you to sit back and listen. We will start tonight. I will introduce my guests. We'll be introducing Christian Brooks, who is out of the Office of Public Witness. We will be introducing Alonzo Johnson, who is the Director and Coordinator of Self-Development of People. And last but not least, Carlton Johnson will be talking from out of the Theology, Education, and Evangelism of Vital Congregations. Welcome, my colleagues and friends. So glad to have you tonight. We will start this off with Brother Alonzo, who will be picking up the historical piece. I'm just going to spark him with a question, and he's just going to jump right in. And so one of the questions I wanted to asked you about the historical piece. Most people think that reparations is a new issue, that is something that's just came up, that people are asking about something that's long gone past. And so I want to start that question. Hopefully your presentation will lead into this whole idea of reparations being something new and really a long history. So I give you my brother, Alonzo Johnson.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to all my incredibly esteemed colleagues that are here at this forum and in this conversation. Michael, thank you for that question. It's so interesting because the way we talk about reparations, right, you would think that somebody thought that critical race theory invented it yesterday, right? Almost as if that this is something brand new and this came out in just a few years. But of course, reparations is a new contemporary conversation, and those conversations become newer and newer about how and all those kinds of issues. And my esteemed colleagues, Christian and also Carlton, can tell you a lot about those historical pieces as well. But this is not a new concept, obviously, right? This is not a new thing. This is something that has been with us for a long time. And especially for those, I always, when I'm asked about, how do we go about having conversations around reparations, I like to usually answer, I'm going to answer you the way that I answer folks, to start with that brief historical snapshot of reparations as it relates to Black Americans, right? Very, very simply, it is General William Tecumseh Sherman, right? The issuing of 40 acres and a mule, which consisted of a loan of an army mule set aside for each former slave family, right? And after the war, radical Republicans in Congress passed laws requiring confiscation of former Confederate property to provide the ex-slaves with 40 acres and a mule. And in 1866, of course, President Andrew Johnson vetoed the legislation. So starting there with 40 acres and a mule. And also, having those conversations about, what was taken. The larger question, what was taken from Africans when we were bought here as slaves? And what was taken from us as we were working and tilling this land and developing? Remember, cotton economy funded just about everything, right? Cotton economy it funded everything, and we were key to that economy. So reparations and the historical implications of it basically goes right back to, how do we give back? How do we understand that this economy was built on the labor of African peoples that were used as slaves. Really important to make that distinction, rather than saying African slaves, because we were not slaves in Africa. And so this distinction is really important to make, and also understanding how we worked this land, how we contributed to this economy. Cotton being that one issue, and one of the many, right? How do civilizations exist? You have to have people working, and we were made slaves to do this. So and we were not, we were beaten and all the horrible things and the evils of slavery, and with the additional evil of no compensation. So this was built. There was some recognition, and which is really radical at the time, that something needed to be given back to American slaves, folks who were made slaves. There's something needed to be given back, and there had to be some kind of recompense, of course. Which and just as I read in the historical tidbit, was overturned, and then land was given back to Confederate folks. And if you have not, if you don't know the history of that, I would urge folks to look at that history of how, again, Black folks in this country were disenfranchised out of land. And so
Yes.
having a conversation about, disenfranchisement, a lack of, recompense. And so historically, and there's far more in reparations, right? My incredible colleagues who I've worked with, and we've had these conversations, they can get you those details and get into the nook and crannies of the many times in American history that we have been seeking reparations. And so this conversation is old as the hills,
Right.
as the expression goes, but yet still contemporary, in a sense that it must remain contemporary so it's not forgotten, and
Right.
especially as we talk about economic issues of today.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to. Oh, I'm sorry, Michael.
No. I just wanted to kind of bring Carlton into this, and maybe Christian as well. So Carlton, so you deal with vital congregations, and the whole theological background is rooted in theology. I mean, and thinking about this whole idea of manifest destiny too, and how some theology came out of that. I'm just going to kind of open up to you just to add into what Alonzo was saying around the theological piece, and we can go back and forth, but just want to know maybe your thoughts around that whole issue about not trying to throw your curve about manifest destiny and how maybe some of the theology fell
out. Yeah, thank you for that, Brother Michael. I will say that there is a concern from the level of even our understanding of our three foci, Matthew 25 foci, where congregations, church folk, would like to be considered vital, only dealing with congregational vitality, never dealing with the issues of racism and never dealing with the issues of poverty, so that we continue to believe that there is something profoundly right about racism and notwithstanding the former enslavement of African people, and that there's something profoundly right about hoarding resources so that some percentage of people have it all and others have nothing. So I hear that manifest destiny piece. But one of the things that I am crystal clear on is that reparations are biblically correct, profoundly biblically correct. In the biblical context, as we read over and over again references to slavery, especially in Paul's letters, we think that Paul is only talking about freedom, quote unquote, from sin. That's wrong on so many levels, it's not even funny. First of all, the reason that Paul continued to use that reference of slavery is because those were people who were either enslaved or constantly under the threat of enslavement because of the structure of empire. In other words, those individuals would oftentimes find themselves enslaved due to indebtedness, find themselves buying, if you will, some of their freedom. And so there was no point in time, there still is no point in our present day history where it's okay to consider someone being enslaved, but the only thing that's free is that they're free from sin. When I consider the book of Philemon and the story of Onesimus, right? This whole story of, yes, now this man is useful again. He's useful because he's full of Christ now, so he's useful again. But you kept the brother enslaved. They freed the brother, and then the rest of this stuff is about what's owed him, because I can guarantee you whatever he quote unquote stole, according to that story, was nowhere near the reparations that were due him, having been formerly enslaved. I want to take a quick pause right here and to say that there is a interesting conversation around the comparison of enslavement of individuals in biblical times and text versus chattel slavery. It's important for us to understand that chattel slavery is not biblical slavery. Gotcha. Chattel slavery is the most evil form of treatment of fellow human beings in the history of the world, in recorded history.
It's good.
Right. And it's important for us to understand, however, that the Bible does speak to ways of treating those who are formerly.
That's good. I just wanted to pick up, I think, Alonzo, I'm going to get you to Christian because you're the foci later on. But I think Alonzo wanted to talk a little bit, kind of updating us a little bit more about the history. I think he has some pieces that might be really important for people to hear.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Michael. And, and as I listened to Brother Carlton, I mean, I think this is, there's the biblical connection to it in so many different biblical motifs, right? But it's important to mention, I was at a doing reparations piece some years ago, and Carlton and I met at that time. And I remember after this reparations event, someone from the church, Presbyterian Church, had come up to me and said, wouldn't it be great if we as a church could have made some kind of statement about reparations? And I was like, well, we have. And the person was, surprisingly astonished, right? And I said, and really began to tell her that history in response to a recommendation from the Racial Equity Advocacy Committee, REACT. The 213th General Assembly, in 2001, created a task force to study issues of reparations for a number of issues. And this was, and they were really concerned about Black and brown people on the whole. So a lot of this was, it had centers for Black reparations, but it was really framing of the hurt, the historical hurt and need for repair for people of color, indigenous folks, Native folks. And so the task force, these folks got together, sought an input from a variety of Presbyterians, right? And at the 216th General Assembly, in about 2004, the report of the task force to study reparations was adopted, affirming that Jesus Christ calls us to repair wrongs, done to one another, and to work for personal social reconciliation and renewal. So my point in laying that out is that we have already had an existing conversation around reparations, and the task force did an incredibly amazing job kind of laying out the prophetic theological analysis of reparations and harms done. And just as, my brother Carlton has lifted up, Carlton and I are commonly known as the Brothers Johnson. Lifting up the motifs that are really important to understand that this is not, that reparations is not a creation out of the air, that this is a biblical concept. Yeah, and really quickly, and that wasn't the only time, right? And I say this because, we want Presbyterians especially to be having these conversations, and we have existing literature, we have existing pieces in which they can do it. And just very quickly, self-development of people, the ministry in which I work was born out of the conversation about reparations through James Foreman, who came to the General Assembly in '69. And so we've been there's ongoing conversation, and the Presbyterian Church, surprisingly, we have been having these conversations, and we need to revisit them as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. So the brothers, Christian, we got the brothers Johnson. So let's bring a sister in here. Let's jump off the policy piece that Fonz was talking about, HR 40. So I know you've got you're in DC, you're around these conversations. Open us up a little bit about what's going on right now, what we really need to pay attention to.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, I work for the PCUSA's Office of Public Witness, which is our public policy and advocacy office. At the Office of Public Witness, we communicate the General Assembly's policy positions to Congress and the administration. And we have used this report from the task force on reparations in our advocacy for HR 40. So HR 40 is the Commission to Study and Develop Reparations Proposals for African Americans. This bill was first introduced by John Conyers in 1989. This bill has been reintroduced every Congress since then, and it has never passed the House. So in 2021 was the first time that the bill even passed out of committee. It had been introduced for 30 plus years. This is the first time the bill had been passed out of committee. So at this point, we are really fighting for the bill to be brought for a floor vote and fighting for representatives to vote yes on this bill, because as has been talked about, there is biblical justification for reparations for African Americans. And also, given the history, African Americans need and deserve reparations. So we have an action alert, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen, where you can interact with your member of Congress. You can shoot them a message letting them know that you, as a Presbyterian, support HR 40 and asking them to support HR 40 as well. Right now, the bill has the most co-sponsors that it has ever had in the history of it being introduced. So we're really close. We just need people to keep this conversation going. Keep this conversation going. Keep talking to your members of Congress. If your member of Congress has already co-sponsored the bill, then shoot them a thank you message. Let them know thank you for co-sponsoring this bill, and tell them to hold the line and keep fighting for this, because this is extremely important legislation. And for those who don't know what the legislation is, it is a study bill. There's a lot of misinformation about HR 40. Folks are saying that if the bill passes, then we're going to get reparations tomorrow. That is not true. This is a study bill. It is literally research. It is researching the effects of enslavement and resulting systemic racism on African Americans, seeing if there should be reparations. Right. We know that if there will be, right. And then developing proposals. And I might add that the United States does have a history of paying reparations. So in 1980, Congress established the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians. So HR 40 is actually modeled after this commission. And as a result of the Wartime Commission, that led to the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, where the United States issued an apology to Japanese Americans for their internment and also paid reparations for their internment. And I might add that the United States has never issued an apology for enslavement. There has been a bill or a resolution in the House of Representatives, but in order for the government to make a full apology, there would need to be legislation passed by the House of Representatives. It would need to also be passed by the Senate and signed into law by the president. That has never happened since slavery ended in 1865. Wow. But I must also add that the United States actually paid reparations to slave owners. So in 1862, the Compensated Emancipation Act of 1862 was passed, and with this act, it ended enslavement in DC, but it also established a commission to hear petitions of former slave owners and provided direct compensation to slave owners for their loss of human property.
Wow.
So the United States has a history of this. It's time.
Wow. This is all good stuff. So I'm gonna throw a question out to all three of you, and maybe you'll answer from different perspectives. So what are you hearing? And this goes out to all three. What are you hearing on some of the pushback to the idea of reparations? Alonzo, what has been the historical pushback maybe that you're in? Carlton, what are the kind of what's the pushback? What are people using scripture and biblical stuff to push back? And then finally, Christian, what are you on the ground? So what are you hearing? What are the major pushbacks today that you're hearing? So let's start with Alonzo.
Oh boy, I mean, we are so. It's a great question, Michael, because the pushbacks have been, it's over with. The pushback has been, I think there was one particular quote. You already got your reparations through Barack Obama being president, right? The pushback has been, we don't. I mean, it's all kinds of everything from economics. We don't have the money to do that. We should forget this. This is over. My family didn't do this. Not everybody did this. I mean, there's a lot of pushback. How will this happen? Check wise, the whole kind of simplistic idea that somehow we'll all get a check in the mail, right? So there's been all kind of pushbacks about, and then also, and some of the pushbacks we know the origins of them come from racist understandings of Black people being lazy, and this is just another way to get free money, right? Mm-hmm. And so I mean, and I'm not saying this out of my head. I mean, this is the kinds of things that we hear, and it's controversial, right? It's a controversial issue. It evokes resentment. It revokes challenge. Reparations as a form of justice is really taboo a subject for people,
right?
Especially in the church, right? This idea that you work for your food, and look, people are working, but we recognize how chattel slavery, just as Brother Carlton mentioned, and the evils of it, how it's economically hurt us as people in the country, and has some long-term economic issues. But the pushback has always been, any way that people can approach that. We don't have enough money. What does that mean? Why can't you forget the past? Those people are no longer living. Slaves. Right. Somebody said to me, weren't slaves treated well though, based on some of the history books? And all these kinds of things to deter from the argument of or the conversation that needs to happen.
Right. So Carlton, yeah. So I'm also hearing this idea of getting to reconciliation and forgiveness. Right. You're going to get we want to get to reconciliation, right? And the whole thing of forgiveness and stuff. So could you maybe just give some insight around principles, the theology around these ideals that people have and related to reparations?
Yeah. First things first, I'm going to say, put it on record, it ain't gonna happen. Ain't gonna be no reconciliation until we get our stuff back. Consider this, I tell this story regularly. If I break in your house, and in the process of breaking in your house, I damage your doorway and your windows, once I get in, I steal all of your audio equipment and your televisions. When we get to court, I ask you for your forgiveness. Now, out of your good Christian, well, biblically taught Sunday school mind, you may feel some obligation to shake my hand. But when do I get to give you your stuff back? Right? Because the judge can't give it back to you. So when will I give you your stuff back? Second thing that I've done along the lines of what Alonzo was talking about is, what about the fact that I damaged your windows and doors? Now you no longer feel secure in the place where you live. What about in the process of breaking in one of those windows, I came through your daughter's window, and God only knows what I did to your daughter. So now, what about her trauma, right? What about her daughter's trauma, right? So we have to address all of that when we start having these conversations. I want to kind of lay something else on top of this. In the theological conversation, again, that was sort of the ethics of it all, right? But in the theological conversation, just as there is profound biblical evidence of the requirement for reparations, there is a long church history, some of what we've been talking about folks feeling like, I wasn't around at that time, so therefore I don't owe, I shouldn't. I would ask those good people to read the book of Ezra, right? In the book of Ezra, King Darius, who wasn't even born during the time of the Israeli enslavement, found it the right thing to do. I'll read here. It says, the king who wasn't even born when Israel was conquered, ruling over an empire that wasn't even in existence when the exile began, passed a law decreeing that taxes be paid by people in that area. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that's a biblical support for it. There's scripture text in, and I can read it when we have time. Of course, I just encourage folks to pick up their Bible in Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 12 through 15, which lays out in very, very succinct detail what happens when someone is released from slavery. Right. And again, we can do this biblical slavery versus chattel slavery, but as evil as chattel slavery was, and I'm going to go take it another further, as one pastor says, as evil as chattel slavery is, the response should be equally good. So this layout of the response in reparations in Deuteronomy 15, verses 12 through 15, tells a biblical mandate for how we should respond to formerly.
Absolutely. Christian, so piggybacking off the asking the same question about what are some of the pushbacks, you're in the heart of it, right? You're in the heart of the policy making and all those things. What do you see from a political standpoint of some of the pushback we are seeing against HR 40 and reparations? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so there's a lot. There is a lot going on. I already mentioned before that people are going around saying that if we pass HR 40, then you'll get a reparations check tomorrow. That is not true. It is a study bill. But then there's also politicians that are talking about other bills saying that they are a form of reparations. So I have heard that the Voting Rights Act was a form of reparations, that Build Back Better is reparations. The Farm Bill, there was some funding for Black farmers in the Farm Bill saying that was reparations, but it's not. And we know that it's not. First of all, reparations has to be targeted. That's number one. Number two, the community that was affected has to be involved in their repair. I am going to say that again. The community that has been affected has to be involved in their repair and accept the solutions. Someone who has been an oppressor, so to speak, well, not so to speak, someone who has been an oppressor can't then decide to, okay, this is how I'm going to pay you out, or this is how I'm going to repair, and just be okay with it. That's not how reparations work. And if we really want to get to a place where we are reconciling, then there needs to be a different approach. There absolutely needs to be a different approach. But one other thing that I hear all the time is, I didn't do it, right? I didn't do it. Are you gonna make the son pay for the sins of the father, or whatever have you? And to those people I say, like, you may not have physically owned enslaved persons yourself, but you benefit from enslavement. First of all, enslavement built this country. Slavery was the first economy, or the first industry within this country. Cotton was king. Cotton made America the powerhouse that it is right now. We literally, like, our nation's leaders are literally sitting in buildings that were built by the hands of enslaved persons. Literally built by the hands of enslaved persons. You are benefiting. But then there are also companies that built their wealth off of the backs of enslaved persons. For example, Aetna Insurance. Aetna Insurance insured enslaved persons as farm equipment. And now we see where Aetna is. Some of our churches, our denominations owned enslaved persons, rented them out to keep the lights on, and some have these big endowments from slave money. So like, let's be clear, you are benefiting from enslavement, and I'm still suffering the effects.
Right.
I am still suffering the effects. When we think about what really happened, here is what happened. You had persons who were kidnapped, raped, beaten, tortured, forced to work for generations, and then they were just let free. They didn't own anything. They had no money, no jobs, no education, because it was illegal to educate a Black person. They were not given anything to help them build a life, and never saw a dime of the wealth that they helped build for this country. And even though the Black community was able to thrive, right? The Black community was able to build into a strong powerhouse. Those issues still exist. Those economic inequalities still exist. This educational inequality, it's still there. So just like there are white folks who are still benefiting from enslavement, Black folks are still feeling the effects of inequities that were created as a result of enslavement and colonization.
Absolutely. So this, which to me, be in my mind, at least, to think about some of the large, huge corporations today that are still in existence, right? Who we can actually trace back, right? Their benefit of slavery. I was listening to you saying, I wanted you to say it again clearly, that we are the only group. We are the only group who have not received reparations for the damage and trauma it was caused.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah. Now, I do want to say, though the Indian Claim Commission was set up for any group, tribe, band, or identifiable group of American Indians to come forward for claims, that was absolutely not enough at all. No. At all. However, the Black community has not received an apology, and the only step towards reparations has been HR 40, that has been was first introduced by John Conyers in 1989 and has been introduced by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee since then. It has passed out of committee, and we're still trying to get it to pass the House.
Wow. Interesting.
I want to say, Brother Michael, if I can add to that, just talking from a theological place, but mostly the work of the church, more often than not, we find it easier to worship Jesus than to follow Jesus. Right. And so what that means is we do charitable things as opposed to working against systems. Right. So a lot of times we, at the level of the church, bless our hearts, benevolently so, we give and we do things at the level of the individual congregations. We've seen schools, seminaries, colleges. We've even seen presbyteries to give reparations, to do things from a reparations standpoint. But that's in some cases, and not in all cases, I don't know all cases, is because it's easier to do that than to get into the harder fight of racism against a government that be actually responding to it. So it's sort of like, if we write off a check for 10 grand and or do something at the level of the church, we're done with it. We don't have to get in the streets and fight.
Right.
And it is important for us to get in the streets and fight against systems.
Vital, thank you. I wanted to say to the audience too, please, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat. We want to answer some of your questions and comments at the end. And so back to Alonzo about the historical piece. Man, that's a long time to be here as a people and build up so much. And still, we were 1% of the wealth, and now we still 1% of the wealth in this country. Just disparities are off the chart when you just think about today. and the one percenters. And I think sometimes people don't know how large a gap, a wealth gap that this really is, and what kind of people we are talking about who are totally out of in any wealth building capacity. I mean, talk about BIPOC people, African American communities. Could you, historically, what gains have we made? What gains have we made around these issues? I know, as Carlton was saying, there are different institutions. Like I think, Princeton, did some reparations, some other institutions, but how far do we have to go to get people's attention around how vital this is, particularly for African American community, because it's almost to the point now where almost makes you want to give up hope, because the devastation is so wide and broad. How have we come? And maybe all of y'all want to chime in, but to me, it just seems like we haven't come that very far at all.
I think that's, in essence, the struggle is still on. I think that the work, I don't want to say we've not gone too far, right? Because of the work of people before us, right? The work of the James Foremans, the work of people that, the work of Conyers, as Christian mentions, the work of folks who have been involved. I mean, we see things like in Asheville, North Carolina, they unanimously voted to formally apologize and provide reparations to its Black residents. We don't know what that's going to look like. And so, but we still have a long way to go. And I think, as Carlton mentioned, I mean, when you look at the as both Carlton and Christian mentioned, you look at the institutions involved, right? It's insurance companies, but it's also academic institutions,
exactly.
Right? We're talking plural institutions, right? Which is,
exactly.
If you really want to read something really heartbreaking, take a look at the history of Black farmers in this country. And the loss of land through years of this kind of these issues being at the fore, and Black farmers losing their land. These are also reparation issues, right? You get people that have land, that have livelihoods, and they're taken, they're gone. And so, when we still have issues where, you can't sleep in the lobby of the school while Black, you can't walk down the street while Black, we will continue to have these issues, because it is about the value of life. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to note that the question of reparations is, again, it transcends the idea of a single check that redresses this. It asks larger questions about centuries of capital gained by institutions. And then, of course, this has been discourse for the last few years. And then we talk about, those formations, Black Wall Street, right? As we talk about, Black Wall Street, and then it was bombed, right? We talk about, even here in Louisville, there was a Black Wall Street configuration, and urban planning kind of took over and destroyed it. So you have, points in history where, Black communities making its own economics, building around these collective economics, and being destroyed. So so there's the issue is that, that there is continual rage and racial hatred against these kind of movements. We see it in history.
Thank you. I got a question for
Can
Christian.
Can I jump in on it?
Okay, and then I got a question for you, and then I want to go to Carlton as well.
Okay. I second everything that Alonzo has said, and I also want to say that it's so important for us to pay attention to policy. The reparations conversation is the foundation for larger systemic change. If we're really going to get to a more equitable future, then we have to see this reparations conversation as the foundation for a larger movement towards systemic change. Because when we think about the advancements that the Black community has made, and there have been so many, but then also look at the policy, right? As Alonzo was talking about, you have land grabs, you have eminent domain, you have things like the New Deal. that was for that gave why am I blanking on this? Minimum wage. However, the jobs that Black people held at that time were conveniently left out. You also have Social Security. Conveniently, Black people were left out of that. You have education. Like, there are so many policies that are passed when Black people make one step forward that are intended to knock us 10 steps back. Look at voting. Literally, look at voting right now. We saw the election. We had the highest voter turnout in America in centuries at 67%. We had the highest turnout of Black folks, Indigenous folks, Latinx folks in centuries. However, look at the voting laws now. Look at how many restrictive voting laws have been put in place now. So it's a larger question of how are we going to make this systemic change? Just like as Alonzo and Carlton have said, this reparations conversation is not just about a check. It is about a larger movement to a more equitable system.
Right. So you kind of answered my question around the voter suppression piece, but because that's huge. But I wanted to, there's a question in the comic to go back to Carlton around, here's the question, Carlton, is how do we then reconcile what you were saying about charitable giving of churches versus sort of many congregations that feel the church should not be involved in politics, and they see reparation in HR 40 as political?
I'm going to try to address that in two quick ways. First of all, it begins where I left off, and that is that it's easier to worship Jesus than to follow Jesus, right? So when we think of following Jesus, then who are we following? Which Jesus are we reading about that wasn't political? Jesus' whole ministry was about addressing systems and responding to people's needs because an oppressive government, an oppressive system was rolling over these people. So you cannot read about and choose to follow Jesus and not be political, right? You can choose to worship Jesus and not be political, but you can't follow Jesus, which, by the way, it was Jesus who said, follow me, right? So there's that first. Second of all, I want to make sure that there's not the notion that I'm saying charity or justice. We need both, right? I can't leave you starving and in need while I go address issues of hunger, right? We got to do both at the same time. So what I'm saying is that we can't assume that any particular task, any particular deed is the end of our work. We have to go to what caused the problem, not just solve the problem. And in the case of reparations, we have to get to the issue that addresses all people who were and or are impacted by the institution of slavery.
Oh, this is.
Can I also jump in?
Sure.
So I want to. I get this question a lot because I'm in the policy office. I get this question a lot, and I just want to make it clear that deciding to not be involved in politics is a position of privilege. The Black church has always been involved in politics, so to speak, because the Black church had to be. As a Black woman, I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice to not speak out on these issues, because these issues, my life is on the line. My life is on the line. My freedom is on the line. I am literally sitting in Capitol or in the Capitol. I speak with members of Congress on a daily, weekly basis. I know very well that there are some members of Congress, if they could, would put me back in chains. They absolutely would. I don't have a choice. My rights are at stake. And if I don't have a choice but to speak up and speak out, my allies don't have a choice either.
Powerful
I'm on the line, you on the line too.
Powerful words.
And I want to make it very clear that when you allow oppression to exist in a system, you are susceptible. It can always come after you. It might not hit you as hard as it will hit me, but it'll get you.
Powerful words. Powerful words.
Brother Michael, I wanted to add on to that as well. Not that needed any adding, because I think that was right on point. And Christian's always right on point on this. And but in solidarity with my sister and my brother, the politics. This is not about partisan politics, really. The politics. Anytime, when you look in the gospel, anytime Jesus is asking about, the hungry, just as we talk about Matthew 25, it automatically points politically. When you ask why people are hungry, when you ask why people are poor, when you ask why people are struggling and suffering, when you ask why people, and watch what Jesus does. Who does Jesus heal? These are automatic political questions about who's in charge. And as you notice, my favorite quote, one of my favorite quotes comes from Kelly Brown Douglas, the womanist theologian. She was asked, was Jesus political, and should the church be taking care of these political issues? And her answer was, they didn't kill Jesus for praying. And so the reality is this: anytime you start looking at the poverty, questioning why people are living hard, questioning why people don't have jobs, you are automatically looking at political systems. And again, getting people to move away from beating up on one side or the other. The politics of Jesus were not Democrat and Republican. That didn't exist. But the politics were about, and I would say, and I would hope to say, that no matter where you are on the political spectrum, I ask a question when I do poverty workshops, how many of us in here love poverty? And nobody puts their hands up. I don't care what their political affiliation is. Nobody loves it. Thank you, Mark Koenig, who was on that task force, who put the link for the task force study report there. And so that's the key. It is political. It points automatically to it when you talk about poverty and loss and hurt and those kinds of things.
Fantastic. It's powerful, powerful. So let me put this out to all of you again. So kind of moving from the theory and policy to activism, and maybe Christian, you want to pick up, what is it that we need to be doing as not only as individuals, churches, communities, and even as a denomination? What are some of the practical things we should be doing right now where we can move this ball forward? And all of you can take a shot at that.
Yeah, so HR 40, engage with our action alert, of course. But then also education around reparations, why reparation is important, is extremely important. And we have named some things on this call that we have heard in terms of pushback against reparations. And we need folks to call it out, quite honestly, to call out the things that are being said and speak truth to power, speak facts. The fact that America has paid reparations before, the fact that reparations are biblical. These are things that need to be said. But then also the understanding that between equity and reparations, I hear churches talk about equity a lot. I hear organizations talk about equity a lot, but they're not also talking about reparations. And I don't understand why, because equity and reparations go hand in hand. Like if we really think about it, the inequity that exists today, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was created. It was created by foundational events of enslavement and colonization. And we can't think that only trying to do some form of racial equity moving forward is going to work, because it's not. We have to go back and fix the foundation in order to move forward towards a more equitable future. Trying to do equity without reparations is basically trying to renovate a house with a messed up foundation. It might look pretty, but the same issues are always going to be there, and eventually as time goes past, they will continue to get worse. So we must make that connection, and quite honestly, stop using equity as a buzzword and understand it. Understand it, because as you understand equity, then you will know that Black people cannot have racial equity without reparations.
Right. And I know it's like beautiful. I know it's a lot of resources out there, but do we have a kind of resource that kind of distills this down where it can actually be distributed to congregations? Uh, uh, Maybe not on the level of the national level, but something distilled where people can actually start to pick up some of these pieces? Or do we need a new resource maybe to do that, to get this information down to folks who really need to be aware of these things going on?
Yeah,
Or
so
do you know of any resources like that we could actually tap into?
yeah, so we have the report from the reparations task force. There's a study guide that goes along with the report. There is also our racism policy, Facing Racism. That's a very good policy. It talks about anti-Black racism, but then there might also need to be a creation of a new report or a new resource that kind of bridges the gap between the two.
Right. Right, but that's what I mean. As I was just thinking about actually what Carlton was saying, just even the theological piece, just kind of breaking down, the principles of the text to a place where it really gets down to the people in our congregation who can really absorb, the theological piece. So I think that's all powerful. I'm getting I'm getting from all y'all rocking, y'all rock. It's beautiful. We've been on for a while, so I wanted to go back and just give us a time to top and give you each maybe a minute to maybe kind of sum up. This Black History was about the idea, the theme was going from resiliency to recovery, because we always talk about how strong we are. And what we wanted to do in this whole thing is why we had the self-care piece on, you can't do nothing, you can't march, you can't advocate, you can't if you're not well. So we wanted people to have a piece where it said, look, take care of yourself. Here are the things you need to do. We came back, talk about holistic health. And so this piece, in a sense, is what I'm hearing is so critical. It's so critical that this really be elevated and gotten out, that because so many people are not aware of this issue, not the historical, not the theological, and not even the policy, that we really have to push this. But I wanted to give each of you just some closing remarks around the areas that you work in. I want to thank you all. You're some brilliant folks. Christian, you are a brilliant young person. I'm glad. I'm glad to hear you. This is the first time I think I've actually heard. I mean, I've seen some videos, but it's the first time I get dynamic. Carlton, thank you so much, my brother. I appreciate it so much. And Alonzo, thank you, my brother. Any closing remarks? I think we didn't get any more questions in, but I think we at the time there. But I want to just put it out to you. Each say a closing piece, and we're gonna close out. And I'm gonna close with the benediction, and we're gonna thank everybody for coming. And I think somebody said we need to do Black History every month. Every month we need to be doing this. So we're gonna try to push to do that. Closing remarks, Alonzo.
Thank you, Mike, and I thank my colleagues for this incredibly robust conversation around an issue that is incredibly thorny, as some have described it in literature. But I think my closing remarks are like this. We need to be talking about this. We need to be talking about injustice. We've got. There are Presbyterian folk reading all kinds of books.
Right.
We're reading all kinds of books.
Right.
We're reading books on racism. We're reading incredible books, and these are amazing resources that we're reading. But paying attention to the connection of reparations and equity
Yes.
disenfranchisement, paying attention to how reparations, slavery, how it continues to have its tendons into our society today, paying attention to the fact that Jim Crow, segregation, racial terror, lynching, all the things that we have had to bear and to carry are connected to these issues.
Yes.
Just as my great colleagues have mentioned some of the evils that come, but paying attention to this conversation, which is not about free handouts, but this is about recognizing, but also importantly for us, paying attention to how reparations and repair and rest are also connected. How do we claim our own time back? How do we take care of ourselves in all this as we are fighting these issues, as we are addressing the issues of reparation? How do we claim time
Amen.
for ourselves, right?
I know that's right. Carlton, give us a word.
Bless you, man. Thankful to have been a part today. I'm thankful to be a part of the work of the Office of Theology, Formation, and Evangelism, specifically the Office of Vital Congregations, where we talk about as one of the marks of a vital congregation being having an outward incarnational focus. And to be outwardly incarnational means being Christ in the world. Here's a way that we can do that. Congregations can do that in support of this issue. Right around election time, every congregation is going to get that knock on the door by that person who wants their vote. Here's the power of the church. Here's a group of people following a particular understanding of right. Brother pastor, sister pastor, here's what you can say to that politician. Come with your stance on reparations. And if it's good, our people will support you. And if it's raggedy, you will not get a single vote from this congregation, whether it's 9 people or 900 people. That is the gospel. That's being Jesus in the world.
That's power. That's power.
Ashe.
Christian, close us out with sister, give us a word, and then I'm going to pray. I have to pray, but give us a word.
Well, as I mentioned several times in the call, HR 40, HR 40, HR 40, engage with our action alert, call your member of Congress and tell them to support HR 40. If they've already supported HR 40, then thank them and tell them to hold the line. You can call your representatives and also call your senators. But pay attention to voting rights. Voting rights really on the chopping block right now. There are several there have been several instances where the Voting Rights Act of 1965 has been slowly chipped away at and chipped away at and chipped away at. Right. We've seen what the voting rights bills in Congress, what has happened, all of them have been filibustered. But you can get involved with your state. Voter suppression is real. The United States has a deep history with keeping people away from the polls, and it's happening now. Talk to your state representatives, your state senators. Look at the bills that are coming up in your state. Be aware of the voting bills. And if there is a bill coming forward that is suppressive, then say something, organize around it. But this voting rights is extremely important because we're voting to decide who's going to be in office and make laws.
Right.
At the state level, at the local level, and at the federal level. This is extremely, extremely important. So HR 40 and voting rights.
That's a word. I want to thank you all again. I want to give a shout out to DeEtte Decker, who was behind the scenes, as well as Gail Strange and Richard Copley for helping us put on these forums. This has been magnificent. I want to thank you so much. I just want to let the audience out there know this comes from a Jesus place. This comes from a real Jesus place. And I love the heart of my colleagues here and their passion for equality and justice. And we're going to say goodnight with a short prayer. And I'll put it this way: let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be accepted to you, O Lord, my strength and redeemer. Brothers and sisters, colleagues, friends, and family, we're going to bid you good night. Thank you all. You guys hang around for a little bit for a check-in, but thank you for coming. It was a wonderful forum. Repair.